They say mothers give without expecting anything in return. But what happens when the child you gave everything to treats you like a burden to be erased? My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 76 years old, and for most of my life, I believed in one thing. Love means sacrifice. I wasn't raised to speak up or ask for thanks. I was taught to give, quietly. And I did, yet. After my husband passed, the house in Cape May felt too quiet, too full of memories. I thought I was fine living alone until my son Ethan called. "Mom," he said, "I think it's time you moved in. You shouldn't be by yourself anymore." I remember how warm I felt when he said that, like he missed me, like he still needed me. I didn't realize until much later what kind of need he meant. I sold the house within 2 months and packed my life into boxes. Ethan and his girlfriend had just bought a new place, a sleek townhouse in Montclair. He set me up in the basement guest room, said it would be cozy. I didn't complain. I brought my photo albums, my recipe box, my knitting. I wanted to be useful. A week after moving in, Ethan said his restaurant loan had fallen through. The bank needed more collateral. "I wouldn't ask," he said, "but I'm desperate." So I gave him what I had, $150,000 from my retirement savings. No contract, no conditions, just trust. That's what mothers do, right? I cooked their meals. I scrubbed floors when the cleaning lady forgot. I looked after their golden retriever, even when he chewed my shoes. I stayed quiet when Ethan forgot to introduce me at his business events, when his girlfriend sighed every time I entered the room. Still, I told myself this was love. This was family. I kept believing that if I gave enough, Ethan would remember who I was, that he'd say thank you, that maybe one day I'd hear, "I love you, Mom," without asking for it. But deep down, something inside me had begun to ache, not in the bones, but in the heart, an ache that whispers, "They don't see you anymore." I didn't know then that this would become my revenge story, not of rage or cruelty, but of quiet truth, of a mother who gave everything. And finally, one day, stopped. I remember the music that night, not the melody, but the silence when it stopped. It was Ethan's grand opening, the restaurant he'd been working toward for 2 years. Candlelight, jazz quartet, champagne flutes taller than my hand. Everyone wore black and gold, I wore purple. I thought it would make me easy to spot in a crowd. I was wrong. I had just stepped near the main screen where a looping slideshow played. Ethan shaking hands with investors, laughing with his girlfriend, posing next to blueprints I helped him afford. I saw one of the flower vases leaning crooked, and without thinking, I reached out to straighten it. But arthritis doesn't care for timing. My hand gave out. The vase tipped, wobbled, then fell. Shatter. The whole room gasped. I froze. Ethan turned, eyes already sharp, even before he saw the mess. His voice cut through the room like glass. "You always ruin everything." I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but his hand got there first. He didn't slap me hard. It wasn't the force. It was the meaning. It was the fact that he didn't even hesitate. Then he said the words, "I still hear at night. You ruined my life." He said it like I had done it on purpose, like he hadn't begged for my help, for my money, for my time. And in front of 50 people, guests, investors, employees, he turned to the staff and said, "Get her out of here." No one moved to help me up. I heard shoes squeaking, glasses clinking, but no one said a word, except a waiter, maybe 20 years old, who looked like he wanted to ask, "Ma'am, are you okay?" but didn't. And just between us, have you ever been in a room full of people and felt like furniture? Not even invisible, just background noise no one bothers to turn down. If you've ever felt that way, would you let me know in the comments? Not for sympathy, just so I know I'm not alone. Anyway, I stood up by myself. My knees cracked. My hand was bleeding a little. I grabbed my purse. I didn't cry, not yet. Ethan turned back to the crowd like I had never existed. And just like that, I was edited out of my own son's story. I had paid for the stage, but I was never part of the cast. And that night, I started to understand some people don't just forget your sacrifices, they resent you for making them. I didn't sleep that night. The guest room, Ethan's basement, was damp and quiet. The overhead light flickered when I turned it on, so I left it off. I sat on the edge of the bed in my dress, shoes still on, hair pinned crooked from when I'd hit the floor. My knee throbbed with every movement, but I didn't feel pain. I felt emptied out. When I looked to the side near the small dresser, I noticed a cardboard box I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside, wrapped in an old dish towel, was the photo album I made for Ethan when he graduated culinary school. It had taken me months. I'd sorted through years of birthdays, baseball games, school plays. I wrote little notes beneath each photo in gold ink. Your first apron, the night you stayed up learning to make flan, your dad teaching you how to grill. I thought he'd keep it forever. Instead, that morning, he tossed it on the kitchen table like it was junk mail. He was already standing by the trash can when I came upstairs. His girlfriend sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Ethan held the album in his hands. "Where were you last night?" he asked, cold. I blinked. "You asked me to leave." He said nothing, just stared at me for a beat, then tore the first page straight down the middle. "Stop," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," he snapped. "You ruined things, you always have." Another page ripped, a photo of him and his father. Gone. A birthday party. Gone. A moment that only I remembered. Gone. I stood there, frozen. Not just because he was angry, but because he meant it. I was no longer Mom. I was just a mistake in his way. He dropped the torn pieces into the trash, slammed the lid down, and walked out the door. Didn't look back. I sank to the floor. I lifted the lid and pulled the photos out one by one, my fingers shaking. Each piece was a cut. Not paper, memory. I tried to line them up again like puzzles that no longer fit. I found tape in the junk drawer, tried to piece a few together, but the tears made it hard to see. I wasn't crying because the pictures were ruined. I was crying because maybe I was never in them to begin with. Maybe I was just holding on to a version of him that never existed. And right then, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like something discarded. The day after Ethan tore up the photo album, I didn't get out of bed until nearly noon. Not because I was tired, though I was, but because I didn't know what the point was anymore. I lay there listening to the footsteps above me, muffled voices, a blender going off in the kitchen. Not once did he knock on the door. Not once did he check to see if I'd eaten or if I could even stand. That afternoon, I opened my old planner, the one with the cracked leather cover, and flipped to the name I had written months earlier. Cameron Blake. Harold and I used him years ago when we finalized our will. He was quiet, respectful, and never treated me like I needed things dumbed down. I called his office. His assistant still remembered me. "Of course, Mrs. Ellis," she said. "Mr. Blake can see you this afternoon." The office was cold, the chairs too big for someone my size. But when Cameron walked in, he smiled gently and sat across from me like an equal. "You don't have to explain everything right away," he said. "Just tell me what you need." And I did. Slowly, at first, then with more certainty than I thought I had left in me. I want to know every account that still has my name on it, every credit line, every joint asset, and I want to know what my son's been accessing. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just pulled up the records. That's when I saw it. 5 years ago, Ethan had convinced me to co-sign a credit card to help him build his credit. I agreed. I trusted him. But what I didn't know was that I was still the primary holder. He'd been using it without limit. Travel, designer shoes, bar tabs, a $6,000 booking fee for a private chef. The balance due? $48,327. I sat there, still. I didn't cry. I didn't ask how could he. I already knew, because I'd let him. Every time he took, I handed it over with a smile and a whispered, "That's what moms do. Not anymore." "Can we freeze it?" I asked. Cameron nodded. Absolutely. We'll cancel the supplementary card, set a fraud alert, and if you'd like, we can move your other accounts. Quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him. Yes, I said. Move it all, everything that still has my name, somewhere only I can touch. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. They say the loudest break isn't a scream. Sometimes it's the sound of a woman finally saying, "No more." The day I left Ethan's house, there was no yelling, no suitcases flung down the stairs. I just folded the last of his laundry. Ridiculous, I know. Wrote a short note that said, "Please don't look for me," and walked out the door. Grace picked me up that morning. She didn't ask for details. Didn't say, "I told you so." She just opened the passenger door and said, "You're coming home with me." Her apartment in Queens wasn't big, but it was warm. Quiet in a different way than Ethan's house. No tension clinging to the walls, no tiptoeing around other people's moods. Grace had cleared out her spare room, painted it in a soft robin's egg blue, put fresh sheets on the bed and a tiny ceramic sign above the window that read, "You belong here." I stood there staring at that sign for a long time. It had been years since anyone made space for me, not just in their home, but in their heart. The first week, I barely spoke. Grace didn't push. We had tea every evening. She'd come home from the hospital in her scrubs, drop her bag, and ask, "How was your day, Aunt Maggie?" I didn't know how to answer at first. What does a woman say when she spent years shrinking herself? But eventually, I started answering. "I planted rosemary on the fire escape," I'd say. Or, "I finished knitting that green scarf." And Grace would smile like that meant something, like I meant something. I didn't post anything online, didn't tell anyone where I was. Ethan called, but I didn't pick up. His messages got longer, angrier, then finally, desperate. But I wasn't hiding. I wasn't afraid. I was just healing. One morning, I woke up before the sun and made fresh lemon scones. The smell filled the apartment. I sat by the window with my tea, wrapped in a shawl I'd made myself, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting. Not for someone to call, not for someone to apologize, not for someone to say thank you. I just was. No one knew what I'd done. Freezing the accounts, moving the money. There were no fireworks, no drama, but inside me, something had settled. I wasn't a bank. I wasn't a maid. I wasn't a mistake. I was Margaret Ellis, and I was starting over. Not with noise, but with breath. Not with fire, but with light. I never imagined I'd speak in front of a crowd again, especially not with these knees. But there I was, standing in the basement of the Ridgewood Public Library, folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, a water-stained banner behind me that read, "Elder Voices, Real Stories of Resilience." Most of the audience were women. Some came alone, some with daughters. Most sat with their hands folded tight, as if holding something in. I adjusted the mic, took a breath. "My name is Margaret Ellis," I said, and I used to believe that being a mother meant never saying no. I told them everything. How I gave my savings, my home, my energy, how I was slapped at my son's grand opening, how he said, "You ruined my life," how he tore up every picture of his childhood like it was clutter. I didn't speak with anger, I spoke with truth. And silence filled the room, not with shock, but recognition. Some women nodded, one wiped her eyes. Another reached across the aisle and grabbed a stranger's hand. I told them how I walked out without yelling, how I froze the credit accounts, moved my money, left my name off anything I no longer trusted, and how no one clapped, no one congratulated me. But for the first time in decades, I felt whole. Afterward, a woman in her 60s hugged me and whispered, "You gave me the courage to leave my daughter's house." Another said, "I thought I was crazy for feeling forgotten. I'm not crazy. I'm just tired." Outside, Grace waited with her daughter, Lily, my great niece, but the only little one who ever called me Grandma. Lily ran up and said, "You were so brave." I scooped her up and kissed her on the cheek. Grace held up her phone. "Smile," she said. "I want to remember this." And I did. Not the polite smile, not the one I used to wear like armor. A real one. One that said, "They burned my pictures, but they couldn't burn my worth." That night, I tucked into bed in my quiet little room and looked at the ceiling. There was no noise, no pain in my chest, no name flashing on my phone. Just me, still here, still enough. And if you're watching this, and something in you said, "That's me," then please leave a comment below. Not because I need to be heard, but because maybe you do. You're not alone, you're not forgotten, and your story still matters. This was my revenge story. But more than that, this was my return to myself.